Today on Doomed! Do you all remember the Tea Party? I mean, if you've been paying attention to politics at the beginning of this decade, they'd be pretty hard to forget. The Tea Party were the insurgent group that pretty much gave the Republican Party a lot of problems throughout the early 2010s and took over a number of seats in Congress. But that's not all they were about, and just because you haven't heard about them recently, that doesn't mean they've disappeared. So we're going to do a complete refresher today about the Tea Party, where they came from, and what they're doing now, all so we could get to the current day conspiracy theory that is QAnon, and how they may very well be the next Tea Party. Joining me today to discuss this, and let me bring her up on the feed here so we can get this conversation rolling. Joining me for today's show is Dr. Rachel Blum. She is an assistant professor at the Carl Albert Congressional Research and Study Center and the Department of Political Science at the University of Oklahoma, and the author of the book, How the Tea Party Captured the GOP, Insurgent Factions in American Politics. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, we actually were on the air earlier this week on Cincinnati Public Radio discussing this topic, and it was a very shortened, condensed version of what we're going to discuss today. But it was very nice being on that show with you, and I'm glad it happened because I became aware of your book, and that's what brought you on the show today.
Yeah.
So, the Tea Party, I guess let's start here. There's probably a lot of people who, even politically minded people who listen to this show, who are saying to themselves right now, why is Matt doing a show in the year 2020? As we're about to the end of 2020, presidential election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, why is he doing a show on the Tea Party? So what is the importance of the Tea Party today? Before we take it all back to where it all came from.
Well, I don't think we can understand the Republican Party of today or the rise of Donald Trump or the kind of disintegration of part of the country into conspiracy theories without understanding the Tea Party, and then specifically how it was able to be successful within the Republican Party. Because in essence, the Tea Party used the tools the Republican Party had given it to become the new establishment. So when we talk about the Republican Party today, we're essentially talking about the Tea Party.
Right. So let's go back. Now, I remember hearing about the Tea Party during the primaries in 2008 as basically what the Ron Paul fan base were calling themselves, the Ron Paul supporters. And, there were certainly different aspects that you'll discuss that they shared with what the Tea Party later became known as. But it was a bit of a different group. And then I remember really seeing that the Tea Party had taken off into this new evolution of Tea Party with that Glenn Beck rally in 2010 at the, the march, the rally at Washington or something like that?
The rally to restore honor or something.
Right, I have it right here. The Restoring Honor rally, right, and he did it on like Martin Luther King Day or something like that. It was something very inappropriate for for him to be holding this on. But so let's that's my own personal recollections of the early days of the Tea Party. But tell me, tell us where the Tea Party came from. What were the beginnings of the Tea Party?
I mean, I think that's pretty accurate. The first time people started using that term as something that they could be was right up before that election. But the Tea Party, as we came to know it, is pretty different than the Ron Paul supporters. So there's this famous rant from CNBC commentator Rick Santelli in February 2009. So right after Obama's election, the ACA, the bailouts, and Santelli goes on the floor of the Chicago Stock Exchange and just riffs or rants about how we shouldn't be paying the losers' mortgages and everyone who wants to go back to how it was, like, join me for a Tea Party. And quickly people started picking up on this. So you got a lot of spontaneous movement in places like Seattle, and then you get a little bit of funding. So at this point, this phase of the Tea Party is a lot of it to most people. The Koch brothers jump in, they start handing out materials on how to make signs, how to organize, how to have events in local groups and make websites and use Twitter. But it's that rally that we get to. There's Million Man March in 2009 in April. And then we have Glenn Beck kind of later on moving into the 2010 midterm elections. And in that space, the Tea Party became its own beast. So I remember being in DC for that rally when everyone was there for Glenn Beck, and like the big thing you noticed was that everyone on the metro had a tri-cornered hat on, or was wearing a flag, or was in some sort of costume, like period Civil War reenactment costume, and they're all going downtown DC, which is, you see a lot of stuff in DC, but not that.
Right.
And I remember thinking like, oh, these people are real dedicated. And I even knew some people who'd bust in from middle America to come to this. Were very dedicated to it. And that's when I started to be like, ooh, I think a lot of regular people like this.
Right.
And that's when I started paying attention.
Now, people need to understand that, when we talk about the Tea Party, the word Tea Party, the first word, tea, actually stood for something.
Taxed enough already.
Right. So these were people who ostensibly were anti-taxes. Now, I assume that must have been what this group was about. Is that true, Rachel?
They wanted you to think that, kind of. Keith. But that started cracking really quickly. So you got the keep your government hands off my Medicare kinds of signs, just like this clear misunderstanding of entitlements and taxes and who was getting what. And you had a lot of animus against change, and particularly against the person of Barack Obama, that really had nothing to do with how he was handling the financial crisis or anything else. It was this generalized fear of what he represented for the country.
Now, what would you say the number one motivating factor of the Tea Party was? What was the thing that rallied them to organize in those early years, like 2010? What was the rallying cry, the main organizing point for them?
I think in the early years, they really did believe that it was about taxes. They truly believed that they were trying to be fiscal conservatives. And even into 2013, 2014, when I would interview local group leaders or even national group leaders, they would really try to bring everything back to that. When I would try to ask them about abortion or race or anything else, they'd say, well, I mean, a lot of local groups think lots of things. Our group focuses on opposing jihad law in the U.S. because that's going to happen. But the thing that unites us is this belief that the government should be smaller. We really like Ronald Reagan, which was like useful as a cue card maybe, but didn't really explain the sustained animus not only against Barack Obama and the Democratic Party, but at that point, very clearly against the Republican establishment. Right.
So they were sort of fighting two fronts here. They were going after the Republican Party, and they were obviously just Obama was and the Democratic Party was a huge enemy to them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
So let's focus in now on the battle with the Republican Party aspect of this, because this is where, obviously, in my point of view, I think, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this too, actually. Maybe we should hit this before we move on. In my point of view, without a President Barack Obama, there is no Tea Party. Because even though there is that insurgency group that wants to take over the Republican Party, the real organizing point, at least that motivated the people, the Republican base who had transitioned over to becoming Tea Party supporters, not so much those who were making money off the Tea Party, the leaders of the Tea Party, those looking to take over the Republican Party from the inside. I'm talking about the masses who showed up on these lawns and protested with their signs. I don't think they would have gotten as active, if active at all, if it wasn't for the first black president.
I think that's true. I think there's a lot of evidence of that. But before I was anywhere near finished with my book, there's a book that came out called Change They Can't Believe In by one of my mentors, Chris Parker, who is at the University of Washington and studies race in American politics. And I mean, they have a lot of convincing research they do in terms of experiments that shows this kind of deeply cloaked racism that was motivating a lot of Tea Partiers despite the window dressing of fiscal conservatism. So Barack Obama certainly gave them the embodiment of what they thought meant the destruction of their America, the end of this kind of unearned white dominance.
Right. Yeah, the government was going to finally get involved with their Social Security and their Medicare. I mean, it is... That sign will stick with me forever. It is totally astounding. It is amazing.
Yeah, because those aren't welfare, right?
Right. Get your government out of the government. Get the government out. No government in the government.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It was a really Trumpy thing for them to say.
Right.
It was a thing to say.
Right. Oh, Trump to me is just the Republican Party with the mask off. I mean, it's always been there. It's just... They were always able to conceal it, use their dog whistles, but now it's just mask off. Just they flaunt it and they're very open with it.
And he's, it's almost pre dog whistle, because the whole dog whistle idea comes into prominence with Richard Nixon.
Right.
But Trump is almost more like George Wallace. If at that weird juncture in history when the Southern Democrats split, if George Wallace had been the nominee instead of Goldwater, for example. I mean, Goldwater was extreme in his own way, but he was the kind of proto-Koch brother choice, like the conservative establishment's choice. And there was another possibility for conservatism at that time. It didn't take it then, but that element never went away.
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, you see it with Reagan, the Reagan years, and then when Newt Gingrich is Speaker of the House. I mean, it's to me that's just the there's a line that just flows through all that and brings us here. But let's now talk about it. And from the title of your book, this seems to be really where you focus on, where the Republican Party gets taken over by the Tea Party. Where does it begin? What's like the jump off point for the Tea Party to go from? Tea Party goes from the Ron Paul fringe to sort of this mainstream Glenn Beck far right racist group to starting to actually put forth actual congressional candidates.
Well, the answer is in some steps, right? But the best way to explain it is by thinking about a coalition. So basically to explain this, we have to set aside a lot of how we think about parties, which is as these unified wholes. The Republicans believe this and the Democrats believe that. Republicans are conservative, Democrats are liberal, and it's this kind of false equivalence. And this assumption that there are never compromises. But in reality, parties, especially mass parties like we have in the US, are coalitions of a bunch of groups who want things. And whatever the party's platform, their presidential nominee is at the time, is basically the least bad option to the most people in that coalition. But what happens with the Tea Party is that you had a lot of different groups in the coalition who didn't really fit in the Democratic Party. You couldn't have these militias and border control sheriff's brigades go over to the Democratic Party and just hop on the bus, but they weren't getting a lot of attention in the Republican Party. They were kind of like, go sit down, you're embarrassing us. And you get these people, a lot of people who are very strongly climate deniers, people who believe Common Core is a mass government conspiracy, just a lot of different tiny groups that didn't ever get their way in big party discussions. And when you get enough of those groups together, they can form a sub-coalition. And if that sub-coalition is concentrated enough, and if they know how to use the machinery of power, which in our case is actually like conventions, primaries, caucuses, and at an even more local level, like city council, school boards, these kinds of things most people don't like paying attention to. When you have a very concentrated group of people who want to do that, they slowly can take over a party that's mainly made up of people who think they're a little off. And that's what happened.
I gotta say, I was not expecting at this point in this discussion for it to be that analogous to QAnon. Honestly, I'm a little bit like I've been covering QAnon. I mean, I was covering the Tea Party in the early years, and I've been covering QAnon since, what was it, 2.5 years ago, since it first started, and that might be the most succinct way I've ever heard anyone just put it all together. And it's to hear it that way is actually like we're in for it, aren't we? Because I think that QAnon is much more dangerous than the Tea Party, because the Tea Party may have been, and I'd say this without putting down the danger the Tea Party was, but they at least existed in a reality somewhat.
Yeah,
it was a
grandma's Tea Party, and that
right.
was our
Like
grandparents in the Tea Party. They had
right.
some measure of, I don't know, restraint.
Right. Like, even though there were those different, like you said, those different like fringe areas, the Tea Party was mostly people who were racist, but like old school racism. Not that it's any better, but there's a difference. There's a difference.
They didn't think they were racist.
Right. We're not talking about hood wearing. Right. I'm sorry, the Skype cut out for a second. Say what you were saying?
Oh, they truly didn't think they were racist. They just thought they deserved some things. And if other people got things, then that would mean less for them.
Right. It's the old school type racism of the welfare queens, not so much the we should, eliminate an entire race of people. Yes, that's...
Yeah, it's
right.
Like white entitlement.
Right. With QAnon, there's no basis in reality. So let's get back to the Tea Party, but I just needed to go off there because it hit me. Now, you brought up how you didn't do the both sides thing, but it made me think of, I'm sure you hear this a lot when you were talking about the Republicans and the Democrats and how these groups decided who they were going to take over. You must hear this a lot, especially when you were writing this book and as you got to promote it, so who is the, but there's insurgency groups in the Democratic Party who are problematic too, I'm sure. Speak on that a little bit, because no.
Yeah. I think it comes from this deeper fallacy that a lot of people have fallen into that, is fallacy of false equivalent. You know what I'm trying to say. But we falsely think that if there's one thing in this one group, there must be an equal and opposite thing in this other group. And for some reason, a lot of people are uncomfortable saying that there's anything bad any one party does in our system. It has to be both of them, both being bad at the same time. But it's, as with siblings, when we have fights, it's usually not that both of us were equally causing the problem. It's in the parties, the Republican Party has done a lot more problem causing. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. The way the party shook out historically in the 1960s to 1980s, the last time the party system kind of flipped, the Republican Party just had a much more unified message to start. There were a lot of things that you had to believe if you were going to be a Republican. And some of it's because the 1980s Republican Party was really shaped by another faction, and that was the Christian right, and they had their own kind of party line. You had to toe their own contract with America, that everyone had to sign off on their own insurgency. The Democrats haven't had that, because the Democrats became the party that was a coalition of everyone who wasn't quite right to the Republican Party. And it means the Democrats have not, they haven't taken such strong lines on who's in and who's out as the Republicans have. So that means that, there's a progressive wing of the party, if we want to call it that, or there are people in the Democratic coalition who are progressive. But the Democratic coalition has never really said, oh, we won't embrace any of that. We won't ever allow any of that in. So when you aren't sidelining people, you don't end up with these really extreme factions. I think that's part of it. I think the other part probably has something to do with the people in the factions, the outlook they have on the world, the things they're willing to believe, and how suspicious they are of people who aren't like them and of change.
Right. I mean, the so-called extreme factions on the left are the ones who are, I mean, the extremism they're pushing for the Democratic Party to do are usually things like giving health care to everybody and things like that, whereas on the other side of the spectrum, the extremism on the Republican Party is that there is a global satanic pedophile cabal made up of people from the Democratic Party and the Hollywood elite. I mean, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, and they sell children on Wayfair. I mean, this is not the same thing as what Bernie Sanders' most far left supporters believe.
Right.
They aren't in the same class of things.
Right. And I should just mention, today is the the 9th anniversary of Occupy Wall Street. And like when you think of a movement like that, I mean, Occupy and Tea Party didn't start so far off. And as much as I think Occupy helped sort of set how on the ground, on the street movements work on the left to modern day, you see a lot of the organizational tactics and strategies during protests and marches. I think, during Black Lives Matter and, anti-fascist marches, I think you see a lot of what came out of Occupy influencing that. But that's it. That's really all Occupy's influence was, unfortunately. They didn't take over the Democratic Party. They didn't, I mean, I wish, but...
They didn't, this has been... Well, so what you said about strategies and tactics is actually really interesting, because the Tea Party consciously borrowed those tactics. They were really into Saul Alinsky, who, this was Rules for Radicals, like leftist organizing in the 1960s, like the Students for Democratic Society level organizing. And some libertarian funded groups really got onto that, and they gave it to the Tea Partiers. And there was nothing that appealed to a Tea Partier more than the idea that you could use the left strategies against them. So they incorporated those same mass organizing strategies while taking the knowledge they had as retirees who'd been part of their local Republican parties for however many years, to like do things in their precinct, plus engage in all of this protest activity. But Occupy, they were in parks and tents. They had no interest in participating in party politics, much less trying to take over parties in state and local elections.
Right. Actually, I think that's detrimental to the left, unfortunately, in that case. But
particularly, I think it's ineffective.
Right. I don't know about ineffective, but it's definitely not the way to... I mean, like we're just talking about, Tea Party is the Republican Party. We'll get to... I don't want to get... Spoiler alert, sorry, everybody. But yeah. Tea Party is the Republican Party of today, and Occupy is just the... influential time in my life. I mean, yeah. Unfortunately, right? I mean, yeah. So let's talk about, because let's talk about some of those. I guess the most just maybe off the top of your head, maybe like the 1 or 2 congressional races that really put Tea Party on the map in terms of them, putting their flag in the ground and saying, we're taking over.
A lot of people would look at some of the high-profile primaries in 2010. So Christine O'Donnell's infamous Delaware Senate primary, where she wins the Republican primary and then has a commercial where for some reason she feels the need to assure everyone she is, and I quote, not a witch, and it plays terribly. She loses to the Democrat. But I think that was a little bit more of the just excitement of the Tea Party. All these newcomers wanted to run. The race that stands out to me was in 2014 in May. It's when House Majority Leader Eric Cantor was unseated in a very safe district in Southern Virginia by an economics professor at a local Christian college who had no political experience, no funding from the Republican Party, no funding for big Tea Party groups. But I knew this area because I had interviewed tons of Tea Partiers down there, and I knew there were at least 8 local groups in that congressional district. And on their website, they were very blatantly organizing against Eric Cantor and having all these get out the vote campaigns. And it was send a Tea Partier to Congress, Cantor's soft on immigration. David Bratt won the primary.
Right. I remember that.
Was, what happened.
I remember simultaneously being overjoyed that someone like Eric Cantor lost, and at the same time being like,
oh no.
Well, yeah. Like, oh, I mean, Cantor is who I guess. I mean, it's funny because Cantor is your Republican Party. I mean, he was a very conservative individual, but just because of his background, he is someone who I guess if this all happened just a couple of years later, he's someone that the Republican base would have viewed as the swamp.
Yeah, and I mean, when the Tea Party first started, I remember being in a class on Congress in grad school, and the professor put it this way, I'll never forget. It was, John Boehner's Republican establishment, and then he has the Tea Party in the form of Eric Cantor nipping at its heels. So that was my image of Eric Cantor. It's like the Tea Party's attack dog, except it didn't last for him. He wasn't Tea Party enough.
Right. So would you do you think I brought up the congressional races, and you gave me two, and it's amazing if you think about it. Christine O'Donnell didn't win yet, she sort of was a great example of just how the Tea Party was taking over, even when they lose. Would it be fair, though, to say that these congressional races are when they start taking over, or was there something else going on behind the scenes in addition to all that?
I think by 2014, something was really happening. The action starts in 2010, though, but I've been trying to dice this a bunch of different ways. I've been looking at primary races, in that whole period, trying to see when the Tea Party uptick happens. And to me, the Tea Party moves out of one phase and into another, or you could even say it had 3 phases. But for sure, it had an early protest phase when it was all about taxes, and it was still getting a lot of money from the Koch brothers and Americans for Prosperity. And then by 2010, they jumped off a little bit on their own. There were too many people in it. The narrative was out of control. And then by 2013 to 15, when the House Freedom Caucus starts, right, that's when you see the Tea Party in power. Because no longer were they, this caucus that was made up of establishment people who were trying to ride the energy of this social movement. It was then the new driving force in the House of Representatives. Pretty soon, the Freedom Caucus was the main caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. So to me, that's when the Tea Party as a faction really became powerful. And it did take place over the course of several years. I mean, the complete gutting of state and local Republican parties and the Republicanization of state legislatures and governors' mansions is something that a lot of people ignored to their own peril.
Right. And we've seen the Freedom Caucus literally hold up legislation. They've even been a thorn in Donald Trump's side. I mean, again, and we're talking about this too, because the theme, the overall theme that we're focusing on here, is that the Tea Party did take over the Republican Party, but even inside of that, there is a group of Congress people who have even while the Republican Party has been so influenced by the Tea Party overall, to this group of Republicans who call themselves the Freedom Caucus, the influence wasn't even enough, basically. They wanted it to go even further. Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, just look at the train of Republican speakers, or the amount of obstructionism when the Republican Party controlled both the House and the Senate within the House from within the Republican Party. it's a different era of party politics where to be a Republican not only means to not be a Democrat, it means to not be like those other Republicans. It means to be not a rhino.
Right. Now before we get into what was that?
There's some sort of new purity test.
Right, right. But before we go into how this gets us to Trump, I just want to, because we're going to move beyond them, but I don't want to just not mention how integral they are here. The Koch brothers. For people who don't, because the Koch brothers, I mean, one of them has passed on since, but the Koch brothers really aren't that influential in the modern day Republican Party, thanks to Donald Trump. But during this
Tea Party.
right. But during this, what was that? I'm sorry.
Ironically.
Right, right. But during this time period, they are the man behind the curtain. They are the great and powerful odds. They're the ones sort of funding this stuff and seemingly calling the shots. Tell us a little bit about how important the Koch brothers are during this time period, about 2010, maybe a little bit later, but 2010 to this 2014 time period that brings the Tea Party to power within the Republican Party.
So my answer is a little different than most people's because the kind of simple story on the Tea Party is that it's all dark money. It's just the Koch brothers just made this all happen. And there certainly were and continue to be these really extensive statewide networks funded by the Koch brothers. You have stuff like ALEC that has influenced a lot of state level legislation that was certainly pushed by Tea Partiers. But the Tea Party used the Koch brothers as much as the Koch brothers used them. They initially got a lot of funding and help from libertarian organizations like Freedom Works and Americans for Prosperity. But by 2011 or so, definitely by 2014, 2015, a lot of that funding had dried up. A lot of the libertarians who'd originally been pushing the Tea Party from within those organizations had moved on because the Tea Party was made up of a lot of people who just really didn't care who Friedrich Hayek was. They weren't into Austrian economics. Like, it didn't grip their souls, no matter how many video series they were sent by Mercatus or Cato or anywhere else. And at that point, the libertarian funders just, I mean, they had to step out or were pushed out. The Tea Party also kind of staged a rebellion against any so-called AstroTurf funding. Like they knew they were getting money from big donors and they didn't want it. They wanted to say that they were free from influence in some way. So they also started shying away from a lot of those organizations.
Right. That's interesting. I don't think a lot of people really hear that part of it. I guess it makes sense though, because the Koch brothers really, I mean, their interest in the Tea Party does stem from the Ron Paul version of it, in a sense that they're just looking out for their bottom line, their money. And what the Republican base was looking at in the Tea Party was, how do we stop the other from taking what is perceived as ours? And by that, they don't mean, weirdly enough, those downtrodden, economically struggling Republican base people, they weren't really caring so much about their money. They were caring so much about the cultural issues.
Yeah, because they weren't ever really that mad about taxes. They weren't really hit that hard by the first recession. Like, just statistically, were people who were over 45, if not 65, white, male, college educated, Christian, upper middle class at least. Like, they had money and time to be doing all this stuff as volunteers. So the libertarian message just didn't really sink in all the way. And I had so many interesting conversations with like Matt Kibbe at Freedom Works or different libertarians who were involved in the Tea Party or had just stepped back from involvement in the Tea Party. And the way they described what they saw as the Tea Party's reason for being was very, very different than what I would get from local group leaders or local activists.
Right. So let's now move into the Trump era. I mean, it's how does the Tea Party get us here?
Well, not directly, but we could think of them as paving the way. Maybe that's an analogy some people have used. If nothing else, they were a bridge from an era when John McCain was the face of the Republican Party to an era where John McCain was not considered, well, at least by the president, a Republican, really a Republican anymore at the time of his death.
Right.
Like, this is a big jump, a jump from an era where a war hero is what the Republicans want for president, and then one where you can make fun of a war hero. That took some doing. And a lot of it actually occurs at the activist level. So this is why the QAnon stuff is so interesting to me, because I've been mired in I guess, the pre-QAnon webverse for the last 7 years. Because Tea Partiers did use the internet. They used it badly. It'd be like one website with all their content just like right there up front. Like they didn't seem to know that people could just see what they were saying. But it was all there, and they have all these like Facebook groups and other kinds of local groups that were helping get out this information. And this is kind of the era when all of our parents became the main Facebook users. So the misinformation universe, the fake news world, Breitbart, all of that was central to the Tea Party in terms of their network of information long before anyone ever thought that Steve Bannon could be anyone's chief of staff.
Right.
So it's really planting the seeds to make someone like Trump acceptable.
Right, right. And I guess, a good analogous conspiracy theory would be the idea that, I feel like the Obama birth certificate could easily have been a QAnon conspiracy if QAnon was around during the Obama years.
Exactly. Yeah, I was trying to explain this to my students today. We were analyzing some data about it, and they didn't remember what the birthers were. And so I had to explain it in terms of QAnon. That was the only way that it really made sense to them.
Right.
Like the conspiracy theory.
Right. This, I got to ask some questions about that actually, but we'll get to that in a second. So Trump very much is a product. Like you said, it's not a direct, like, Tea Party didn't push Donald Trump or bring him to president. Tea Party is already, I think, sort of, again, not disappeared, but has ingrained itself as Republican Party by the time Trump is going down that escalator and announcing his candidacy in 2015. But they put all the, they left the breadcrumb trail, like the QAnon people like to say, to get us here. And so do you think, I mean, we sort of said it at the beginning, but do you think that now we're seeing a lot of the similar things that happened with the Tea Party happen with QAnon. And to me, we're at the point where when you have QAnon candidates running for office, I mean, it doesn't get any more analogous. I mean, we're right there. I mean, they're doing their marches just like the Glenn Beck thing in 2010. They're using the internet in the same ways like you just mentioned. They have, we're assured at least one QAnon member of Congress with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, she is going to, her opponent, her Democratic opponent, dropped out of the race under really odd, suspicious circumstances. We don't know what the deal is, but the idea that this guy would run a campaign, win the Democratic nomination, and then suddenly say he's ineligible to become the congressperson if he was to win because he's no longer going to live in the state. Weird decision to move out of the state as you're running for office there. Just
Right.
Yeah. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think it's going to look like? What do you? I mean, obviously this is all speculation, but based on your knowledge of the Tea Party, can you give us any idea of what you think will come of this?
Well, I think that it suggests that the conspiracy-oriented style of politics that Trump and the Tea Party and QAnon have made popular is not a bug. It's a feature of the Republican Party. So these, for some reason, often young female QAnon candidates are are going to be the new face of the Republican Party. And I think one thing it tells us is that if a lot of people have been waiting for a return to normalcy whenever Donald Trump leaves office, that's not actually going to happen. If Donald Trump isn't the cause and the face of this, basically, if it isn't just Trump, but is in fact something that you have to now believe or be or participate in to be a successful Republican now, it's going to persist. And, you could end up with a moderate faction, but otherwise it seems that being a QAnon believer is a perfectly acceptable, if not beneficial thing to be in a Republican primary right now.
Right. Now, I sort of look at it like, I think that, what we're seeing now is just like the taste, obviously, of what a electoral QAnon looks like. Because Tea Party, from the way the Tea Party and QAnon are different at this point, is that Tea Party, at the start of it, but certainly by this point especially, is an electoral politic movement. Like, they know that they are getting together to vote a certain way at the voting booth. Now, obviously, the QAnon folks are mostly, if not all, made up of Trump supporters. However, it is not a movement to get people to vote. Like, they believe in so many different conspiracy theories. Their movement is basically just to spread these theories. It's not to, they're not holding voter drives. They're not, going out there and organizing for candidates. The candidates who are running right now just happen to believe in QAnon. But what I think is that if you see Trump win, the QAnon conspiracy theorists will continue, obviously, and they'll probably just gain a larger eyes. More people know about them. They'll have more eyeballs. But if he was to lose, then I do think you would see a large portion of the QAnon movement turn into a legitimate, organized group partaking in electoral politics to push forward candidates and actually get people to the voting booth to vote.
Yeah, they would have an enemy then. And I think that really is the difference. The only way we'll really know is for someone who is not Trump to eventually get elected, and then we can start to compare, before and after. But it's quite possible that QAnon is what a faction like the Tea Party turns into when it's in power.
Right.
You can't try to get this guy out of office right now. So instead, let's try to make sure as many people as possible at least are skeptical of the right people. They're just asking a lot of questions, and we're planting this information. That could be what it looks like when it's in power.
Right. Now, for people who don't know, everyone who listens to the show has probably heard about 100 QAnon episodes out of the 128 episodes I've done. But QAnon, just to get it out there, is a belief among many Trump supporters. It started with this whole idea. He had in October 2017, he had a group of military leaders at the White House. He throws this off-the-cuff line to the press that he basically says, it's the calm before the storm. And that basically sets off this belief among a lot of conspiratorial Trump supporters that, there's going to suddenly be mass arrests of Trump's political enemies. And then out of this comes this individual or individuals, we don't know exactly how many or who is behind the Q account, but this entity known as Q starts posting on the image boards like 4chan and 8chan, that giving these little like breadcrumbs or hints or tips, basically presenting themselves as an insider within the government, a Trump ally, who's telling his supporters online what's going to happen, what's coming. And from all of this comes the belief that Trump is fighting a global satanic pedophile cabal that's trafficking children around the globe, and it's made up mostly of the Democratic Party, members of the Democratic Party, and the Hollywood elite. And of course, George Soros is funding them, and all the other anti-Semitic conspiracies get thrown in there. And then, in my view, and I've said this from the very beginning, QAnon became an incubator for basically any other conspiracy theory on the right. Pizzagate. Pizzagate is a thing within QAnon, but Pizzagate did die down at first, and this was before QAnon. The idea that there was a DC pizza parlor that was trafficking children in their basement. A man armed with a rifle showed up demanding to be brought to the basement to free those children, only to find out that the pizza parlor actually doesn't even have a basement. It was really like that, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, when he's looking for the basement of the Alamo where his bicycle was apparently being stored after it was stolen. And he travels all the way to Texas to only find out that the Alamo doesn't have a basement. But, but you know, if Pizzagate came after QAnon, it never would have died down because it just would have gotten eaten up by QAnon. Because QAnon, I mean, you see this, QAnon was rather small. I'm sorry to go on this tangent now with you here, but QAnon was rather small before, I mean, it was growing, but it was rather small before the coronavirus pandemic, because what happened is all the coronavirus conspiracies got thrown into the QAnon world.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think the thread that binds all of it together is this thing called status threat, which it comes out of a lot of different theories in psychology, but one of the main ones is an idea from I think developed in a business school to try to explain what happens in a business culture when there's been like a big firing, layoff, some sort of like seismic shift in the organization, and everyone gets really freaked out and they start looking over their shoulders and they're willing to believe anything about anybody. And it's this idea that their status is threatened in the organization, and if they can just figure out where it's coming from, then they'll be safe. And it creates this propensity to believe and then to seek conspiracies, to order your universe with these conspiracies.
Now, if you don't mind me asking you, you mentioned this before, and I need to ask, what do, if you don't mind, like, what is the age range of your students, and what do they know about QAnon? Because I just need to know what's going on out there about this.
I need to ask them about this a little bit more. So I teach undergraduates right now. So I think a lot of these students are between like 19 and 22. They nod very knowingly when I mention QAnon. It's like, oh yeah, okay. Now birtherism, they don't really know what that is, but like QAnon is something that enough of them recognize. But probably Tuesday, I think we're going to have like a little discussion about it, because now I really want to know how much they know, or if they're just, nodding because they want me to think they know.
Right. Because I think there's a real problem with, just how a lot of this birther stuff was being spoken about in the media and among people who were hearing about this news from the media. And the way QAnon is spoken about, and you saw it most in your face with the way that reporter asked that question to Donald Trump the first time he was asked about QAnon.
Yeah.
And it was asked as if this was the thing that was happening. What do you think about your believers who your supporters who believe that you are fighting this global pedophile ring that's made up of Satan worshipers? What do you think about that? And when you ask them about that, when normal people hear about that, they're gonna go, "Oh, Donald Trump's fighting a global satanic pedophile ring? That sounds like a good thing for him to do."
Yeah.
But it's never because I guess people in the media assume that most people would hear that and go, "That's preposterous, that's ridiculous, that sounds insane." But on the contrary, most people hear that, unfortunately, and go, "That's happening? That's terrible."
Yeah, and that belief in itself is like the encapsulation of everything that different fringe groups on the right have been pushing since, for a long time, but at least since the 1980s, right? Like this was the early textbook battles about how the secularists are trying to brainwash our children with theory of evolution, and we should pull out of the UN, and every UN initiative is an attempt by world government, and they're all actually Satanists because they're humanists, which means they're not Christians, and so forth. Like this is what I grew up in a Christian homeschooling circle that was very fundamentalist. This is 100% what they believed that Bill and Hillary Clinton were doing in the 1990s. And so when I hear it now, I'm like, oh, people still think that? Yeah. But right. They're louder. They're better at disseminating it.
Right. It is amazing how even the conspiracies of today, the QAnon beliefs are basically rooted in Christian fundamentalism. It's and a lot of the QAnon backers, a lot of the QAnon believers are very religious. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
it's
simple believing it.
right, which is sort of weird because you think you could just continue to believe that while still using your religion as the backbone. You don't need to belong to this fringe movement, but
I have some theories about that one again, but theories. But so we do know that people, well, millennials and younger, are the least religious generation of any known generation in American history, if not global history. So even those of us who are raised with religious roots don't observe. So there are a lot of people though who, they're sympathetic to that. It was their first language. They use the internet. I mean, I wish we had more surveys of QAnon supporters. They're hard to survey, so I don't know for sure. But my guess would be that QAnon belief is higher among people who are not college educated, who've not been to as many places in the world. So if this is really the case, then it's it's like religion for a religionless time for a lot of
right, right. That's a great point because I've noticed that QAnon, and I a year ago or a year and a half ago I wrote a piece about how QAnon is a boomer movement, and now I wouldn't write that same piece because literally just since the coronavirus pandemic, the
yeah.
demographics of QAnon have changed. I believe younger people are looking for an answer or a scapegoat for the pandemic, and a lot of QAnon conspiracies have come out about the pandemic. I also think, even for the non-religious, even very liberal young people, the idea that child sex trafficking is a bad thing, which it obviously is. There's no one who thinks that's a good thing. But the word pedophile is used so freely by the right to just blast their enemies with because they know how charged it is. I mean, no one, you could even convince that atheist 22-year-old that like that person who's completely on their side, you just hone in enough people saying that person's a pedophile, you'll get that atheist 22-year-old to believe that person on their side is a pedophile, and you have them as their enemy as well.
Yeah, and sex trafficking as well. Like these two have been pretty effectively deployed on the right to steer policy towards causes that they want. So a lot of like so-called sex trafficking laws are really laws meant to push a certain version of morality, and the people that they hurt and penalize are often women who are in different kinds of professions that a lot of Christians don't think people should be in. Or pedophile is a word that Christians were throwing around a lot in the early 2000s as a way to try to scare people off of gay marriage. They just consistently tried to link the idea of someone having a preference for the same sex and someone being a pedophile, or the idea of bestiality, like just making this jump. And if people didn't interrogate that very hard, if they were already prone to want to find a reason not to support marriage equality, then that's a pretty good one.
Right. I mean, you see it happening with that law that they're trying to pass in California right now that's been completely perverted by QAnon and the right, where it's basically just a law to update the how they treat gay people under the law and relationships with adults and underage children. Right now, if you are a heterosexual couple, you get away with more under the law in California, and gay people are getting harsher penalties simply for being gay. So that law to update that is being turned into, oh, the Democrats in California are trying to legalize pedophilia in it's insane, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's exactly an example of this. It's the same rhetoric just being recycled, and a new group of people are believing it. Maybe they forgot what it was linked to. I don't know.
Right. I think it's just a lot of people just don't remember any of this stuff. Like, you're seeing so much regurgitation with different, like, cultural moral panics, things we've seen over and over. this whole cancel Netflix thing. I mean, how many times have we seen this with the explicit content on music, trying to ban video games during the 90s? I mean, it's just the same thing over and over again, just updated. And I honestly think this time they might have found the right thing, because the idea that children are being abused is horrendous. So you just take that, make up bullshit where it's not actually happening, which frankly is sad because it hurts actual child abuse when you make up fake cases of child abuse. But, it's such a charged issue. You just make it up, you say that, and then you let the panic just roll through all these people who are less informed, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of what they did to abortion rhetorically. No one wants to kill babies. So if we just make it about this general fear that there's a baby genocide going on, then who can stand against that? And it is effective, because if you aren't that politically informed and you just hear that emotionally, it's appealing.
Right. Dr. Rachel Blum, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a fantastic conversation. I mean, that specific part of our talk where you just, it was like, it hit me and I was like, oh man, I know it's bad, but just I guess hear it from someone else just in that way, it was just like, ooh, we are in for it. We are.
We're in it right now.
Right. But I think for people who don't think it could get worse, you just wait. Really.
Yeah.
You just wait. Where is your book out now? I want to make sure I get people to it.
It is. So you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it through the University of Chicago Press's page. So they are printing it as we speak, and it's being shipped to different suppliers. So I've been told if you order it on Amazon right now, it says it will ship around the 25th or the 29th. So basically, it's being printed in post-COVID postal service times.
Right.
It's basically out.
Got it. So that book is How the Tea Party Captured the GOP, Insurgent Factions in American Politics. Is there anything you'd like to plug, a website, social media, anywhere people can follow you?
Yeah, my website is rachelmbloom.com, so pretty easy to find. My Twitter handle is BloomRM, BLUMRM. And I don't tweet as often as I should, but I do try to tweet things of this genre, so you can find me there.
Right. Thanks so much again. Feel free to email me when you ask your students about QAnon. I would love to hear their experiences, what they know of it. It's something I'm hardcore in that world, and it's fascinating to find out what people outside this political bubble know of it. Because it's a really small world we're in. I mean, frankly, it's amazing how influential this world is to everything, but also just how tiny it is. And how the rest of the world literally does not look at these things the same way as people like you and I, because they're just not in the thick of it.
Yeah, and it's a lot to get into. There are a lot of breadcrumbs. So.
Right. Oh. Follow those. Follow the white rabbit or whatever it is they say. Where we go one, we go all. Rachel. Take care. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. That was for me that was a great interview. I mean, that was I know a lot of people aren't familiar with the early years of the Majority Report, but go back to 2011, 2012, 2013 Majority Report era when I was on the show. Some of that stuff is even before the Michael Brooks era when he joins the show, but me and Sam were covering the Tea Party stuff at this time. And it is really, like I'm telling you guys, we are in for it. I can always be wrong. And when I mean wrong, I mean there could be changes that happen in the world. Who knows, where QAnon just turns a completely different way, or who knows what. But the way things are going right now, which is all I can really do to inform myself and you, the way things are going right now, it's going to be bad. And it's going to be bad. And it's going to be bad. I mean, people were wondering over the weekend why I decided to say anything about that whole Netflix controversy with that French film they put out. And I'm telling you, it is 100% because of this. Do you think I really have an affinity for coming of age films about girls dancing? It is because of the entire realm that is the conservative. Honestly, I think conservative isn't even the proper word for it anymore. We are in a world that is being shaped by the far right. And it is completely being shaped by conspiracy theories. It is being shaped by evangelical, far right evangelical Christian beliefs. And if you care anything about literally any sort of sane semblance of the world you once lived in, I mean, there's nothing very sane about a world under a pandemic, but if you enjoy your Star Wars, you enjoy your video games, your Fortnite, your Minecraft, your whatever, even the most innocent of cultural things, these folks, these conspiracy theorists will comfort. I mean, look at Tom Hanks. There is no better example than what they are doing to Tom Hanks. There has never been a single negative thing out there on the internet, a single bad report, a single actor talking shit about Tom Hanks. Yet the QAnon people are coming for Tom Hanks saying he's a pedophile. I mean, I don't know what other example I need to give you guys. You don't even like his movies. You could hate him because he's a rich celebrity, whatever. But the idea that Tom Hanks is an evil, satanic pedophile who's trafficking children is just batshit crazy. I'm sorry. And if they could come for Tom Hanks, they'll come for you and everything you love as well. So even if you're not a fan of whatever it is they're coming for, you should still fight back against it. Because, you know, like I just said, they'll come for you next. Really. I mean, Charlie Kirk went on that whole rant about how the left is trying to jail Trump. And if they win this election, if Joe Biden wins, they'll come for you, your money, your children. It's projection. It's projection. That is what they're doing right now. Look at what they're doing to those women in that facility in ICE in Georgia. It is something that you guys should be aware of. And that's, you know, that's all. I don't know what else to say. I don't want this to be something where Sam Cedar is going on MSNBC in 2 years saying we should have listened to Matt Binder like he did when I was really trying to sound the alarm about how important the Gamergate stuff was. I don't want that to happen again. I would love to be able to shove it in everyone's face and be called. I remember Michael Brooks called me like a Nostradamus. I would love to be able to do that and tell everyone how right I was again. But I'd prefer not to. I prefer it not to happen at all. So let's all get on the same page and realize what's going on here. Simple enough. All right. Patreon.com/Matt Binder. That's how you can support this show. I would really like to be able to do more stuff. I'd really like to be able to do more shows. I'd really like to be able to spend more time on this. My newsletter is getting a lot of subscribers. It's a free newsletter, misinfo.com. I would like to spend more time on that, and I consider this part of that. Maybe eventually I will, if the newsletter takes off in its own right, I will turn on a subscription for the newsletter, a separate subscription. But if the Patreon takes off on its own, and I won't have to do that. I'll consider it just wrapped up in here. So patreon.com/Matt Binder. Any sort of amount you can give, that's wonderful. If you can't afford to do so, especially in the times of the pandemic, please don't. But if you can, please do. If you can't afford to, or if you'd like to support in non-monetary ways as well, the newsletter, misinfo.com, MISINFO. It's not miss as in like a woman, like Mrs. Info. It's short for misinformation. That's an actual word, misinfo. Misinfo.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/MattBinder. Follow me on social media wherever you are, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Matt Binder, at Matt Binder. I should probably start focusing on TikTok, being that TikTok is really becoming more influential. And I actually think TikTok is a much better platform than like Instagram. So, you know, search me on TikTok if you'd like, Matt Binder. I've not used it, but I'm on there. Doomedpod.com for the podcast version of this show. Leave an iTunes review, leave a Google Play review if you can. Leave a written one too. Now, don't just click those stars. Leave a written review if you can as well. Super chats. If you're watching right now, as we go to the second half of the show, I will take your calls. Actually, I don't know if we have time for calls today, but I will take your IMs. IMs. I don't do instant messengers. I will take your chat room questions and comments. I'll try to get to some of the good ones, but I will definitely get to every single super chat. So again, youtube.com/MattBinder. Drop a super chat in there with your question or comment. It will definitely be read. I think that's it, right? Yeah. All right, guys. See you in the second half of the show. And if you're not coming along for that ride, see you all next time on Doomed. All right. Whew, we are back. Samantha Sider says, Matt gonna be playing that K-pop to get big with the TikTok teens. I gotta say, the first pop song in a long time that I've literally thought is super good. Like, I'm really like, I've listened to it a number of times. Is that song by the K-pop group Blackpink with Selena Gomez, Ice Cream, I think it's called, right? I've listened to it a number of times. It is super catchy. It is a very good song. And this is someone who listens to like Leftover Crack and Crass and, you know, The Unseen and Conflict and, yeah. So, but I appreciate good music of all genres, and that is a great pop song. Oh, Lena, thank you so much for the 2 super chats with the cool YouTube stickers. What do we got here? We got a what is that? A bird, or like is that like a peach? A peach that looks like a bird. One giving a thumbs up, and the other one's blowing kisses with little hearts surrounding him. Thank you, Lena. Excuse me. Lena. Andy, thanks so much for that super chat, Andy. MR had a great interview with Arthur Goldwag about conspiracy theories a few years back, pre-Q. Good primer for this discussion. Thank you, Andy, and I will put Arthur Goldwag on the list, and I will also be sending Sam Cedar a cease and desist for infringing on my territory. Samantha Sider with the super chat. QAnon and flat earthers are beyond help at this point. Listen, I've said it 100 times now, and I agree with you. There are a large portion, I wouldn't say all, but a large portion, a vast majority of these types are lost for good. I'm sorry to anyone whose parents became entrenched with this, grandparents fell down this rabbit hole, uncles and aunts who followed the breadcrumbs. They're gone, most likely. I'm truthfully sorry. There's nothing we can do. It's sad, but really, because and I'll say it again. I am someone who has advocated for reaching out to people who fall for the fringes. I have done numerous shows about white supremacists and white supremacist groups, and have focused on how to get people out of that world, because there's numerous instances of people coming back. Whenever I say that, I think of The Walking Dead, the early days of The Walking Dead, the AMC show, when it was really good, and they were struggling with the things they had to do in a world that has changed, in the world of a zombie apocalypse, and how there are instances where these moral people had to actually kill other living people who wanted to kill them. And there were constant references to how, like, constant moral discussions on the show early on. It's, you know, the show isn't the same now, but early on I thought it was a good show because there were constant discussions about, can people come back from this? If there is a society after everything's gone to shit, can you come back? Is there a coming back from this? And they've said it literally in that way. You can't come back. And, you know, I think there is a coming back for a lot of young people, especially, who fall into white supremacy, organized white supremacy, and unorganized, I guess, in general. I mean, we've seen it. Because white supremacy is still, I mean, they have their own conspiracy theories, obviously, but the basis of it is still rooted in a reality. People are looking for a scapegoat for their own problems, and if you can provide them with the actual entities that are holding them down and hurting them, then you can bring them out of this. There are complete organizations run by former white supremacists and former neo-Nazis where they work on saving people who have fallen into this hole. This is different. How do you convince, how do you reach someone who isn't even rooted in reality? You unfortunately can't in many instances. This is truthfully worse than, you know, anything else I could think of, to be honest, in terms of these far right fringe groups. Rhett says they got to be willing to leave the white power movement first, though. Not even, though. I mean, obviously it helps if they question it, but you can lay that groundwork there that makes them question it. I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about the David Dukes. I'm not talking. I've also used this term on the show a lot. I'm not talking about the true believers. There is a stark difference there. The difference with the conspiracy theorists, though, is that like 90% of them are true believers. Whereas with white supremacist groups, the actual leadership that's actually benefiting monetarily and from a power standpoint, it's not 90% of them. It's much, much less. That's where the real difference lies, to be quite frank. Grim says, life after hate is too little too late for most. There's just a lot of instances that I've read about where, I mean, is it everyone? No, but it's the rate of success is much higher than these conspiracy theories. I mean, that's how you really break this down in terms of how I'm looking at it. Mariah says, Michael Brooks called you Matt Stradamus. Right, he did. That's what he called me, Matt Stradamus. Renee says, how about that Sarah Palin? We didn't even talk about her. That's stunning. But I guess it shows just how waiting she became, her influence became in the Republican Party even once the Tea Party took power. I mean, she left them. So she really didn't matter much anymore. I mean, that's the truth of it. Andy says with a super chat, Matt, what is making you happy these days? I don't know if you guys realize, but I'm a bright side of things type of guy. On a show called Doomed, but that's how I try to look at things, because if you don't, you can't do a show like this. I mean, really. I mean, I've been this. I don't want to say desensitized, because obviously you guys can understand. You see how I can process these things to reflect just how dangerous or bad they are. So I'm desensitized in the sense where I don't let it ruin me and my everyday life. I've been doing it for too long. I just know how it is, and listen. I've been the far right has come at me online in every way, shape, and form. They've called me every name in the book. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. It's literally like it doesn't even. I just ignore it at this point. It doesn't even, sometimes I even read it because I think it's entertaining. But otherwise, I just yeah, man. It's just I enjoy watching movies. I enjoy covering this stuff. I mean, that's why I have a podcast doing it, and I do this YouTube show, and I started a newsletter because I find it fascinating. And I like horror movies. I like I'm currently watching what is it called? That new HBO show. I'm having a mental block right now. Oh my god, I can't believe it. Give me a second here. Are you kidding me? This is unbelievable. I'm completely caught up. What is it? Oh, Lovecraft Country. Right. Great show. I gotta get caught up with the new season of The Boys, that superhero show on Amazon Prime, which is fantastic. Check that one out. What else? Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned in the last episode, my son, he wanted the new Fortnite skins for this season, because it's all Marvel. You got Thor, Iron Man, Groot, She-Hulk, Mystique, Wolverine. Am I forgetting anybody? Oh, and Storm. And I bought the Battle Pass, and we've been just playing it almost every day to level up so we can unlock each and every one of those skins. So I've been doing that as if it's been a job. Because I don't want to leave it to the last minute and miss out on one of them. Because to get Iron Man, you have to level up to level 100. That's a lot of hours of playing Fortnite. Yeah, stuff like that. Spending time with my 5-year-old and 1-year-old. Trying to stay sane during a pandemic. Mariah says, did you hear about the BLM organizers who got arrested in Denver? Got arrested all around the city at the same time. Coordinated effort with SWAT, etc. I think I saw that in passing, but I didn't know all the. I saw someone like reference it, and I can't be on top of everything, so I'm not familiar with that one. Other than I think I saw it referenced in passing. I'll need to familiarize myself with that. Renee says, wait, did I not read Renee's prior super chat? Oh, wait, no, he used the Sour Palin one. Okay. Renee with another super chat. You need to go to that class as a guest expert / seer. Right, but I think she's in Oklahoma, so maybe I can do like a zoom in. Who knows? Zoe, when I was talking about what I'm watching on Netflix and Amazon Prime and HBO, she said to me, what about Cuties? Honestly, this is going to be one of those things where people look back and they think, sane people will look back and say, I was on the wrong side of that one. Just that's just facts. I don't care how many people disagree with me. I'm on the right. I'm correct about this one. I'm always correct about these things. I'm sorry. It is stunning to me, the outrage about this movie. It is so stupid. And you know, the right reaction to it doesn't really surprise me. It's the left. There are leftists who are falling for this shit. That is frankly stunning to me. And 99.9% of them are talking about this movie without having watched it. Your opinion about this movie gives nothing. If you cannot talk about a movie if you haven't watched it. I'm sorry. Your opinion on it means nothing if you haven't watched a film. Watch the movie if you want to criticize it. That's great. I would love to hear your criticisms about any movie after you've watched it. That's the point of films, to get people talking. You can talk about how any movie was good, how any movie was bad, where it failed, what they could have done differently in your point of view. Those are all great discussions. Let's have them. Can't have those discussions if you've ever watched the movie. And it is a good movie. Yes, it's a good movie. If you watch that movie and think about it in the gross, sexualized, perverted discussions I've seen about it online from people who were supposedly criticizing it, then quite frankly, you are messed up in the head. This is on you, to be quite frank. I mean, you are the one who has the problem. MW says Cuties looks very Harmony Korine. I can never know how to say his last name. Is it Korine or Korine-esque to me? I compared before I saw it. I was like, oh, this is gonna be like Kids, isn't it? And I saw it, and I'm telling you, any Larry Clark directed film, any Harmony Korine written film, any like the majority of like French movies, I would say, are so much worse than this. And I don't mean in a way to cancel those either. I am a person who watches a lot of really gory horror films. I don't mean mainstream movies either. I'm talking about like little known B, C, Z level films. I watch art house films. I went to film school. I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was in high school and college. A part of me still very much would like to become a filmmaker and make movies. My splurge purchase when I had a little bit of extra money, and I don't really call it a splurge purchase because I bought it specifically to do this show with. So with the Patreon, thanks to my patrons, is this camera that I'm now using as my webcam because I wanted to use it as a really high quality webcam, this DSLR camera, but also I wanted to use it to hopefully make some short movies when I have a chance. I want to be able to film some documentary type movies on this stuff that I'm talking to you guys about. I would like to be able to do some YouTube content with this camera. And whenever I would get it, if I ever had a chance, I'd like to do some short, like, narrative horror stuff, actually. That's what I was doing in high school and college. I was doing a lot of, like, student film type horror movies. And so that's where I come from. I am someone who can understand that filmmaking is a process. I understand that when you're watching a movie, it is nothing like how it's what you see on camera is nothing like what the actors go through when it's being shot. It is, I mean, you watch any Hollywood actor perform in a sex scene in a movie, in a big mainstream Hollywood film, I'm telling you, it is nothing like what you see in the final product. There's like 50 people in the room. It is a completely non-arousing, non-sexual experience. It is just, you just don't understand it if you're not working in it. And also, if you're not someone who can just read into what the meaning of a movie is, you just shouldn't be watching certain types of movies. I mean, they're not for you. Unfortunately, it seems like the vast majority of people in the United States should not be watching art house films. I think the mistake was Netflix taking this movie because it is a movie that should be being shown in indie movie theaters and with an audience that understands how to take in a movie like that, to be quite frank. I mean, I guess that's really the problem. But that actually assumes, maybe it's not even the problem actually, because that assumes people are watching it, which the case is they're not. They're just not watching it. Tina with the super chat. $10 super chat. Thank you, Tina. I've subscribed to misinfo.com, read the latest piece. Awesome. Then I couldn't help myself. Read the comments and started fact-checking that misinformation. How do you keep from going down that rabbit hole? Well, I love hearing that misinformation because that's just more content for me to fact-check and more content for me to write about. So I appreciate the people who try to fact check me with more misinformation. And I'm trying to think how best to say I don't fall down the rabbit hole without in a way that I can pass it on to people. For me personally, I it's just not possible. I've seen too much. I am too well rounded in this world, and I understand what's going on. I really don't know how to explain, to be quite frank. When you've been doing this for a decade now, like I have, you've seen all the different shit on the right. I mean, you understand the failings of mainstream media. That helps a lot. If you can understand how even the mainstream media partakes in directing the discourse, then it actually helps a lot with discussing the fringe. And this is a really good question. I think I need more time to think about it because I don't want to give an answer that's not good because I don't want people to fall down the rabbit hole, to be quite frank. Like you're asking to keep from doing. I would say is to read media criticism. Read how even mainstream media coverage is biased. Read how they cover American wars. Read how they. Here's a perfect example with in the midst of all these Black Lives Matter protests. Read how look at how mainstream media regurgitates press releases from police departments and their spokespeople, and how they write about police shootings and what happens on the ground at protests based on how the police departments recite what's going on from their perspective. You see it with that man in Buffalo, that older activist in Buffalo, who got pushed to the ground by police and cracked his head open on the floor. The police press release said that the man tripped and hit his head on the floor and was taken to the hospital. And then the video came out that showed the police pushed him. He did not trip on his own. He would not have fell if a police officer didn't throw him to the floor. For literally walking up to the police line and handing them a helmet that had fallen off of one of their own officers. He was bringing them back their own equipment. And they pushed him to the floor and he cracked his head open. And the police put out a release saying that he tripped and fell. If it wasn't for the video, the mainstream media and local news media would have regurgitated that press release as facts of what happened at that protest. I think that is the starting point for understanding how to cover everything else in the world of misinfo and disinfo and fake news. Because, I mean, there is a lot of mainstream media that does do good work, obviously. I mean, there are some great New York Times reporters who are covering the Trump administration and getting some great scoops. At the same time, the New York Times overall as an organization does everything in their power to curry to the Trump administration. You really have to look at it. You really shouldn't have favorite news outlets. You should have reporters and journalists and talking heads and even opinion, columnists and, people like, the Cenk Uyghurs and Sam Cedars and Matt Binders, Michael Brooks. You should have favorites of those. Because you shouldn't judge an entire media organization as the conglomerate and as a whole. Because there's some great writers with the Daily Beast. There's some great writers with the New York Times. There's some great writers with the Washington Post. There's some great writers with the Huffington Post. There's even some decent reporting that comes out of some right-wing outlets sometimes too. I mean, there are some, I don't agree with it, but they are usually reasonable takes to understand a reasonable right-wing view coming from an outlet like Reason sometimes. Not as much, but sometimes. So that's how I look at it. You should have reporters and journalists you trust. Not really favorite publications and outlets. And that's where you begin to understand the media bias. And then I think then you have that reality basis of how this media world works and how people frame things in a certain manner to benefit themselves. And that's how you can pull out the bullshit from the conspiracy theorists and the fake news peddlers. I hope that answered your question, Tina. I know I had that long pause where I really had to think about it. And there's probably a better, more concise answer. But off the cuff, put on the spot, I feel comfortable saying that for now. Peasant Chick says, with a super chat, my biggest problem with Cuties is that Amy, the main character, Ami, never faced any consequences for being a terrible person, straight up almost murdering a girl. I mean, the movie isn't perfect, for sure. I agree with you on that. Well, I would say that funny enough, there's consequences for what everyone's complaining about. I mean, if you watch the movie, you would know that all those things that people are saying are terrible. Yeah, she loses her friends for taking it too far. They want nothing to do with her because she goes too far with the stuff. Literally, like, there's a mini message in there for any, like, young girl that comes across it. You will lose your friends for doing this stuff. Because it's not what is for your age group. It's not appropriate. It's a little bit too much. But yeah, then shortly, I agree with you with, yeah, it's not a perfect movie. Honestly, I would have never watched this movie if it wasn't for the QAnon conspiracy theorist outrage and the religious right harping on this, and then Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton trying to get it investigated and banned. This movie is not a movie I watch in terms of the coming of age movie. I mean, I think of probably the most influential coming of age flick of my generation was Garden State. And I watched it and I think it sucks. It's a horror. I don't think it's a good movie at all. I am not a fan of that movie. Soundtrack's decent. That's about it. I don't like Garden State at all. And I honestly avoid most non-comedies that are, if it's not a comedy, I usually avoid coming of age films. Because it's not really my cup of tea. I like, the art house movies I sort of like are like like Bully is a really fucked up movie, and I think that is a great example of a really an art house type film that pushes the envelope and is I mean, that shit's way worse than Cuties. It's a messed up movie. Kids. Now, Kids is a movie that I think is really good, but I could never. That movie gives me it makes me very uncomfortable. It's a movie I watched once. That's enough for me. I mean, all these movies really are I don't rewatch any movie really, except there's a few movies where like I like that you can put on in the background. Like the first Jurassic Park movie is one of those. I often, my partner and I, she likes to put on Game of Thrones. If we're not particularly setting out to sit down and watch the latest episode of like Lovecraft Country or The Boys or whatever show we're watching, or we're not sitting down to watch a movie. I mean, the next movie on our list is that we've seen like every Rob Zombie movie except that Salem one. I think that's the next movie on our list. We put on Game of Thrones in the background because that's a great show up until the last season. And honestly, we watch that show because every time we watch it, those older episodes, now that we know what happens, we pick up on different things, and it's fun to like hear it in the background while we're like, looking at something online, or she's knitting because that's her hobby. As I'm fucking with right wingers online, she's sitting next to me knitting. So yeah, I mean, I'll honestly never watch that movie again. It's not my thing, but it was a good movie. And I will not let a mortal panic dictate my opinion on it. Dr. Jordan Peterson says, me and my wife like to watch erotic thrillers to unwind. Ah. JJM Hicks says, it's not a good movie in my opinion. Happiness is shown to be adopting secular French society and cultural norms. It is an assimilationist, imperialistic representation of Islam in France. I think that's a very good critique of it. You've clearly seen the movie, and I think that's a very good critique of it. I think the only reason I don't feel that way is because the director has clearly stated that as a black Muslim woman who experienced this is just her experience of it. And this is just her take based on what she went through herself. And if this was a movie written by a non-Muslim or a white woman or a man, or, then certainly I think your take would be one that I would fully be on board with. But that's where I digress, being that it's someone's experience and it's written as thus. I also think it's not completely true, because she, at the end of the movie, she pushes away that what we're to believe is what's popular or among French society, and she pushes away her more conservative religious upbringing, and she just decides to be a normal, reserved child her age. She doesn't wear her cultural garb. She doesn't wear the risque outfits. She puts on a pair of jeans and a shirt and hoodie, and she goes out and plays a completely innocent game of jump rope. And I mean, to me, that shows that, there are plenty of Muslim people who aren't conservative, and that's just a norm too for them. It's not, to me, I view it as she combines the best of both worlds. She doesn't become a non-Muslim. She doesn't reject Islam. She just doesn't want to go to the wedding between her dad and his second wife. That's sort of how I read that. A. Gardner says, y'all want some mind-numbing horror? Watch the Begotten movie. That sounds very familiar. It might actually be on a list of mine to watch. Our Netflix or wherever it is watch list. If it's not on there, then maybe I'm thinking of something else. Oh, you know what this reminds me of? It says it's a experimental dark fantasy horror film. You know what I'm constantly reminded of? People just keep bringing up... To fight back against this movie, they go, just like you wouldn't exploit children to warn about exploitation, you wouldn't kill an animal to talk about animal abuse. Well, I'm not going to talk about how ridiculous that is. It's a complete non-analogous scenario. But I've actually seen a number of movies that have literally partaken in killing animals. Probably the most famous horror movie that does this is Cannibal Holocaust, where a number of animals were killed for the making of this movie. I don't agree with it, obviously. Animals should not be slaughtered for a movie, because the difference between actors acting in a movie and animals being killed is exactly that. One is acting, the other is you're actually killing something. But I mean, I also understand how it's becomes a mode of portraying art, I guess, getting a message across. But Cannibal Holocaust doesn't have a message in that sense. It's just literally wanted to be a movie that showcases cannibalism in a completely horrific. I mean, it's a horror movie, and it's a low budget, gross out horror movie. And I think one of the famous scenes is they like they kill a turtle on in the scene in order to tear it apart and eat it. And I mean, they wasn't from what I understand, they kill a turtle, like a big tortoise for this movie. Like not a little tiny, like a, it's not a fake thing. I just don't think this, James says depicting a thing and situation isn't endorsing it. Right. I mean, people don't understand movies. It's shocking. I mean, maybe we should just be watching big superhero flicks on. Maybe that's all that should be. Maybe that's all people could handle. Sadly. And again, the reason I'm talking about this, other than people asking me, is there is a larger issue here at play, which I mentioned on the end of the first half of the show. They're going to come for what you actually like next. There's a reason I don't get into like fandom wars where people are complaining about canceling a movie because of the fandom bullshit, where fandoms like review bomb a movie because they don't like how J.J. Abrams did this. Or this is political, and that's why I care about it. That's why I have an interest in it. Otherwise, I'd ignore this like I ignore any of the other dumb controversies. Chain Smoking Lefty with a super chat. Love you on the MR Thursday shows. How dangerous do you... Well, thank you. How dangerous do you think the Q movement could get? It's already spread to other countries, kind of like the Nazi Party. It's going to seep into further and further into the Republican Party. To the point where, just like I discussed with my guest, how the Tea Party is the Republican Party now. The Republican Party will be the QAnon. Barring some insane, huge change in the discourse, just some like a meteor hitting Earth or something, and we're all literally like fighting to survive a zombie apocalypse or some shit. Where people just won't even have the time to get online and immerse themselves in these worlds. Barring the destruction of society. And I don't mean how the society is completely changing right now in the time of pandemic. I mean a complete and utter dismantling of it in totality. I think this is going to happen. We need to nip it in the bud now the best we could. And the way we do that is we make it look insane. It is insane, but we reinforce how insane it is. When you see someone talking about it, you and your friends should be in the comments laughing at your buddy talking about it. So any one of their friends who come across it will go, oh man, look at all these people laughing at this guy or girl. They're insane for thinking this stuff. This is a joke. Literally, we need to mock it. We need to publicly shame it to the point where it becomes a antisocial thing to believe in this stuff. You will become a social outcast if this is what you believe. That is how we deal with it right now. Renee says, Guy is interested in writing a book on online political mythology on me from the art theory semiotic perspective. No idea what you're talking about, Renee. No idea what you're talking about, Renee. James says, I'm reading a lot of these comments from James because it seems like his interest in movies are right up my alley. Doom Generation, Kids, and Bully, way more accurate than anything John Hughes made. Right. That's the thing about it, and that's part of what's going on here with this film too. People don't want to see the reality of these things in front of them. They want to continue to pretend this isn't what's happening. They'd rather get the bubblegum pop version of it all. I mean, that's the truth. Zoe says, I don't think Hughes was meant to be realistic, though. No. I don't think that's what James was saying. Well, maybe he was pointing that out there. But what I'm saying here is that's exactly why they prefer watching a John Hughes film. Because it's unrealistic. It's a bubblegum mainstream top 40s if it was a song version of life. MW says, Kids was so good, chilling. Yeah, it's one of those movies that really good. I mean, I probably will watch it one day to refresh myself on how it was done. And you really do watch movies differently too. If you know how many times I'm watching a movie and I step out of it and think about what the behind the camera looks like as I'm watching the movie, like what they're doing to make that scene happen. It ruins it sometimes, but it also is. It's filmmaker brain, I guess. Zoe says, Kids is supposed to be good. It sounds fucking awful and sensationalistic for the hell of it. No, I mean, it's a fairly accurate portrayal of, I think, a certain time period for that age group living in New York City. I mean, maybe it's a little too on the nose in some ways and it's a little over the top in others, but it's a good movie. Spaz says, is Lovecraft Country good? It is surprisingly fantastic. I was thinking very little going in. And after the first episode, I was hooked. That's it. It's got me for the rest of for as long as it goes. It's really good. It's a lot of comments. I'm trying to. Dude Man says, oh yeah, you're talking about Cannibal Holocaust. Right. The director was accused of a bunch of things because people didn't believe most of it was staged. They thought they they were murdering people in the movie. Right. Let's make this clear. The death of people in the movie magic, not real. But there were animals slaughtered for that film. Like I said, the turtle scene. Grim says Cannibal Holocaust isn't just a racist garbage fire, but it's a bad movie. Right. It's not a good movie. But as a horror movie buff, it's a must-watch movie if you're going to understand the genre. It's without a doubt a very influential film in terms of you should not obviously follow in its footsteps of killing animals. I think obviously to make a movie, especially being that you can very realistically portray that through using real animals to show that there is a live animal in the movie, and then using a fake special effects model of the animal for the actual killing of the scene, killing scene. Dude Man says the director of Salo was murdered because people in Italy thought they actually tortured people in the making of it. And Grim says, no, the director of Salo was murdered in a by neo-fascists. I need to watch that movie. Is it Salo? I know a lot of people have been talking about it recently, and I actually have not seen that movie. Google saw, yeah, they killed that turtle, just confirming what I said earlier. And it wasn't just the turtle either. There was the monkey, the monkeys in that movie too, right? I'm pretty sure they were killed as well. Yeah, I mean, but listen, the movie was made. It's like a Z-rated, like a Z-level horror movie. There's nothing, no one's gaining anything out of it. I think it's a good basis to at least know that movie exists, if not outright to watch it, to understand the genre. Dude Man says, oh yeah, I remember that turtle scene. Yeah, I wasn't trying to claim he didn't kill the turtle. All right, I'm not saying you tried to claim it. I just wanted to reiterate to people in case they got confused. Salami says, Jesus Christ, I'm glad I never watched that. Ben says, I'm living in Vietnam. Actually, many of the expats here are Q followers. American, French, German, Australian. It's hard to escape. On the other hand, the government here doesn't coddle believers. Right. Yeah. JJM Hicks says, once a work is out in the wild, you can't stop people from interpreting it. Right, of course. Right. But, of course, you need to watch the movie, whatever it may be, to have an interpretation. Which, for a certain film everyone's talking about over the past few weeks, 99% of the people going on and on about it have not watched it. I mean, that's simple. I mean, you are giving me... again, we could disagree on your critique, but I understand your critique. Because you watched the movie, and I see your critique, and I can see you watch the movie by what you're saying. And that's the important part of filmmaking, right? That people interpret it, and they discuss movies, and people who like it explain why they liked it. People who didn't like it explain why they didn't like it. And people learn from these experiences. They learn other people's perspectives. If they too are a filmmaker, they might take what the criticism people had for other movies and be able to use it for their own work. I mean, the conversations are good that you're having in this chat here. The one where you mentioned your problems with it. I can't see if you said anything else. This feed's moving too fast. But yeah, I mean, that's the point of these sort of discussions about film. Ben says everyone wears masks during lockdowns and they don't last long. Ooh, right. In Vietnam, right. All right, folks. I think that is the show for today. There's just a lot of chats I couldn't get to, and I think we're over an hour now, just on the second half of the show. So this is a 2+ hour show in total from the interview here. And after doing the majority report earlier today, I am officially pooped. So yeah. Folks, thank you really for all right. Dorian says type /raid Kamzat's altar in the Twitch chat, please. How do I do? I really don't know Twitch. Can you do me a favor? Can you why don't you DM me and I'll do it for the next show, because I really don't get how that works. So we need to like I said, I'm on the cutting edge of so much tech stuff, but when it comes to like the inner workings of Twitch, for some reason that platform is foreign to me. I really am behind in that platform. So I'll do it next time, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really happy about how many people are joining us for the live version of the show now. We get real good conversations going. I used to be able to go through and read the majority of chats. Now I really cannot, and it's really up to I try to catch some good comments as they pop up. But I'll obviously miss the ones during the interview. And then, of course, I'll miss a lot of good comments, too, in the chat from just while I'm discussing the super chat stuff. So, I mean, it's good, though, that we'll never run out of stuff to talk about for the second half of the show. That's for sure. So, have a good night, everyone. Have a good week, everyone. And thanks for tuning in. And see you all next time on Doomed.